the Contract Minute, where we talk about the contracts that we use on a regular daily basis that nobody ever reads, but we like people to understand what they're signing. So it all came down to us really talking, after I shut up, about the Buyer's Exclusive Limited Agency Employment Contract. That's a form that is required, but just real briefly, what does that form do for a buyer?
I mean, that form for the buyer makes it legal. So it ensures that your agent is working in the best interest of you. Without that sign, they work for the seller.
So if you're driving down the street and you see a really cool-looking house and it's a great neighborhood and you love it and you call the number on the sign, are you calling someone to represent your interests and your interests only, or somebody else?
Most likely you're calling the seller's agent.
You're calling the seller's agent. And the seller's agent has a duty, a legal responsibility to look out for the best interests of the seller.
Right.
And in the absence of an exclusive limited agency employment contract for a buyer's agent, who is representing that buyer? Nobody. So there is a such thing called dual agency, and we won't get into that because it gets complicated and scares a lot of agents. Start sweating and they get all nervous and stuff. But what is the buyer exclusive limited agency? What does it do for the buyer? What sort of protection does it give the buyer?
Well, for the buyer, it lets them know that, number one, the agent is on their side.
Right. And
the only job of the agent is to work in their best interest, make sure they find them the right house, and not to overpay for it.
So in the transaction of you helping your buyers find, locate, negotiate, close, and buy the house of their dreams, do you sometimes learn personal information about that buyer?
Yes.
Do you learn financial information about that buyer?
Yes.
Do you learn things like that buyer's credit scores and things like that?
Yep.
Sometimes you do. And if you work for the seller, are you obligated to keep that information confidential?
No.
No, you're not. And so if you work for the buyer's exclusive limited agency employment agreement says that the information that your buyer agent knows about you is confidential. They have to keep that because they work for you as a buyer and not for the seller. It's a big deal.
Right.
What other things should we talk about in buyer's agency agreement? Is there a minimum dollar figure that the buyer is committing to paying, and how does that work in the real world?
Yeah, so, I mean, you always go through that with the buyer. You spell that out. For us, we don't ever charge them extra. If the seller's agent the listing agent, if they're paying out 2.7% to the buyer agent.
Or whatever percentage.
Yeah, whatever. We go with that percentage.
Right. So we have to have a minimum percentage in there. But what the buyer's agency agreement says is that we will accept whatever the listing agent has decided to share with us.
Exactly.
Now, and I know that some real estate companies around town, some realtors charge premiums and overages, right? So they have processing fees and this kind of stuff. But we at Girard Realty Group, we don't do that. We typically accept what the seller's agent has decided to share from their commission amounts.
Exactly.
Which can vary. I mean, there's no standard for that, and it can be, 1% or 10%, whatever it is. What about the time frame? How, if somebody is concerned and like, well, I don't want to hire you because I don't really know if you're any good yet. That's fair, right?
Yeah.
So are they obligated to work with you for the rest of their life if they sign an agency agreement with you?
No, not at all. Usually what we do is we set it for 6 months.
Okay.
Just to be careful, so you don't have to keep signing new buyer agencies.
Right.
But, if the person is that uncomfortable about it, they only want to do it for that house, we can make it just for that house, just for that day.
Right. So if you haven't met a client before showing them, you're going to do a consultation before you go out. But it's the first day that you've met a person, you're going to spend, maybe 40 minutes talking about what their needs are.
Right.
Then you're going to go out and look at hopefully, 6, 7, 8 properties to get an idea of what's best for them. Do you really expect that they're going to hire you? They've never met you before. How do they know you're any good?
Right. But, at the same time, you have to protect your time as much as they protect their time.
Right.
So, usually, or all the time, I always have someone sign it before we go into the house. So if I meet them at the house, they have to sign it or I don't unlock the door. And I'll sign it for that house or for that day.
Right. So what you're saying is the flexibility is around the time frame. You can sign, you don't have to sign it for a 6-month period. Mm-hmm. But what we have found over time is that, well, first of all, legally, if you want that agent, if someone wants you to represent them, mm-hmm. they have to sign that. Otherwise, you're really representing the seller in that transaction. So we could go into a whole lot more detail about it, which we probably really, would get a little bit boring mm-hmm. because it's pretty narrow as far as the language. But if you are thinking about buying a house, you should consider, you should really, you shouldn't consider doing it otherwise than to have a buyer's agent who works for you, looks out for your best interests, gets paid by the seller's agent, mm-hmm. doesn't cost you money, and you should appreciate the fact that that's what binds you together with your agent. And if they are not doing the job for you, you can probably get out of that agreement, but you need to at least have it from a legal perspective when you go.